Patrick McCaw, Damian Jones, Jordan Bell, Jacob Evans, Eric Paschall, Alan Smiley-Heach. Those names sound familiar to you guys, right? All former draft picks from the Golden State Warriors. All of them really never amounted to the potential that we thought that they had, right? Got to blame Steve Kerr, right? Steve Kerr, he deserves to be fired. He is a terrible coach. I have heard that suggested to me more times this season than his entire tenure with the Warriors. Now, I'll start this off by saying I think Steve Kerr is a good coach. I do. But I think that just like players, coaches have their strengths and their weaknesses. And for the Warriors team this last decade, Steve Kerr has been a very good coach, right? And you look at who he is and his strengths as a coach. When you're dealing with that much talent, right? It's about winning championships. It's about getting over the hill, right? The controversial Mark Jackson firing, in comes Kerr, and hey, he took Mark's credit. Maybe. Mark certainly laid a foundation, but was he the coach to get them over the top? It was Steve Kerr, right? And you look at who he is and who he has been in the NBA, whether that's a player or a coach, he's got as many rings almost as he does fingers. So Steve Kerr is only interested in competing for championships. Kind of makes sense. He wouldn't be good at developing young talent, right? He's almost like the opposite of Larry Brown. I may be dating myself here. Some of you younger listeners may not know who Larry Brown is. He's a Hall of Fame coach, and he had this reputation of, one, he always wanted to trade everybody, right? Larry Brown, he'd get very frustrated, but he would come into an organization and a team, and he would build them up. If you had a bunch of young talent, Larry Brown would get them and teach them how to win and develop them and have them take steps forward into being good players. But he could never get them over the hill. He wasn't a championship coach. He was a developmental coach. You see what I'm getting at here? I think that there are two separate things. And so this two timeline thing that's been laid out here the last two seasons, yeah, Steve Kerr is not the coach for that job. I'll throw out another thought for you. We always hear, well, Steph is the system. The system is Steph. So why would it be Kerr's job to disrupt the system that is Steph Curry? Is it not that these guys can't play with Steph? Is Steph just as much a part of these young guys not being able to develop a Steve Kerr? Now, I know that's blasphemy, and I'm not trying to, it is what it is. Look what he's brought to this organization and franchise. No one would trade that for anything, right? I'm not saying that, but why would Kerr adjust around Steph Curry in the system for young guys when Steph has proven what he has proven? And so this brings me to James Wiseman. I know, 23 points. What do you have? 7 rebounds, and people are going crazy, right? And people are on Kerr's neck about this. The truth of the matter is, Steph didn't want to play with James Wiseman. Read between the lines. He's too great of a guy to say that, but it's like, look, I'm in the back end of my prime, my second prime after my 4th championship. No, I'm not adjusting around a 21-year-old kid who is learning how to play basketball. It's a ridiculous notion. But Kerr is going to wear the brunt of it. Now, I'm not saying Steve doesn't deserve some blame. Again, there are holes and blind spots in every coach and players, in every person. We all have blind spots, right? We have our strengths and our weaknesses. The coaching players, there's no different, right? But I just think that you have to read between the lines, and it's not just Steve. It's the core that caused some of these issues with these young guys. And you look, I read off that list. Again, Patrick McCaw, Damian Jones, Jordan Bell, Jacob Evans, Eric Paschall. What have they done since they've left the Warriors? Back to Steve Kerr, though. And the human element. Look, we all have our conscious and unconscious bias, and we tend to relate to things that we can relate to, right? I mean, if I'm making sense here, like, oh, I see some of that young guy in me, right? Or I was in that spot at one time. I can relate to that, right? Now, does Steve kind of have this maybe subconscious or unconscious bias towards these role-playing basketball players. If you look at the archetype and the type of players that Steve Kerr likes, he likes the overachieving basketball player, not the raw talent, right? Not the dripping raw talent athlete. Pause. That sounded kind of crazy, right? You see what I'm saying, right? Why? Because he sees himself in these overachieving role players. Now, I don't want to take away from what he did as a player, but he played in a time where there were specialists, right? Steve was a shooter. Then you had a ball handler. Then you had a defender. Then you had a rebounder. It wasn't all these 5-tool guys. It was a different era. But I think that Steve relates better to and likes to give these role-playing basketball players, not athletes, guys that are really good at basketball. Like, look at Ty Jerome. Ty Jerome, there's no, I mean this with all due respect, it's a compliment, but there's no way Ty Jerome should be in the NBA with his physical abilities, but he's that damn good at basketball. And those are the type of guys that Kerr likes, but that it's also the type of players that can fit into the system that is known as Steph Curry, because it's basketball over athleticism, right? So there's that blind spot. And you look at this list of these guys, how many of these guys were basketball players? McCaw, Damian Jones certainly isn't. Jordan Bell wasn't. Jacob Evans, we didn't really even see enough to figure that out. Pascal, surprisingly, he a Villanova guy, he didn't really play like a Villanova guy. He wasn't as disciplined as those guys tend to be. But now you look at the two young guys that we have drafted that have broken through in Jordan Poole and kind of Jonathan Kuminga, right? Poole, while is a basketball player, it's this new generation of player. And I must confess, listen, I'm kind of turning into that old man, get off my lawn dude as well. Like I showed up at my LA Fitness, or my eSport, as they call it, a couple Saturday mornings in the last month or two. And I just didn't have fun, bro. I just didn't like the way the kids were playing in there. And when I say kids, I say like 18 to 30-year-olds, right? Like I just didn't like the way it's just weird. It was kind of like a you go, I go, not really like getting in a stance, like, hey, you hit a three, let me hit a three. I had a kid, I don't know, I may have told this story. I don't know if it was on Patreon or YouTube or not. I was running the wing. I caught it, crab dribble, power hop, and I showed him the ball and then flipped it off the glass. And as I'm turning around to run, he goes, oh, my bad. I should have let you dunk that. I'm thinking to myself, man, I can't get up like that no more. Not just like once, maybe if I had like some momentum and I was warm, but I wasn't trying to dunk it. But I just remember thinking to myself like, yo, what? Right? So I think there is also a widening generation gap between these young guys and I'm Steve Kerr, who's, even older than I, several generations older than I, right? I imagine that some of that stuff is annoying, and I digress. I'm getting back to Jordan Poole here with this. I think the way that Jordan Poole has cracked Steve Kerr's rotation in part of this was his relentless work ethic, right? You've heard over the years with Poole, it's like first one in, last one out. I know that that's a cliche, but Poole truly, his love of the game and his work ethic, his relentless attack at being good at basketball won Kerr over, and he took the opportunity. Now, Jonathan Kuminga certainly fits the bill of some of these other guys as far as just like a raw talent, an athlete. But I think what Kuminga has done is he's so talented, and his ability to defend has allowed him to break into this rotation and a need, right? If Kuminga came along a few years ago during the KD era, he might not sniff the floor either, because there wouldn't be that need. So sometimes it's necessity, sometimes it's just pushing through. But those are the two guys that have, and I'll acknowledge again, Kerr, as long as Steph and the core here, Kerr's going to be here. And that's what he's really good at. You get to, when you have the stars, can you get them over the top? It's managing egos and stuff. It's not always X's and O's and all that stuff like that. And so for what has happened, I guess what I'm trying to get at here is, I think y'all owe Kerr a little more respect, man. It's kind of ridiculous. 4 championships, and he's a terrible coach. It just can't be. It can't be. It doesn't make sense. Let's move on to this James Wiseman thing here. The same people that said, oh, he needs time, you got to give him time, he's only 21, are trying to take victory laps after 4 games with the Detroit Pistons. I've watched the games. I watched the game last night. What did he have? 23 and 7, something like that, right? Very efficient. And look, he looks comfortable. He looks comfortable. He does. His hands have seemed a lot better in the games. I watched the Boston game, I watched the Orlando game, and I watched the Charlotte game last night. Did you see what happened to LaMelo? Isn't that weird, the synchronicity? He's playing Wiseman, and they'll forever be connected with the second and third pick, right? And then he just prayers out to LaMelo. That's a scary, weird, non-contact injury. And you look at what's happened with his brother, and you start to wonder if this is like almost genetics. But anyway, let's get back to Wiseman here. The hands have seemed better. He seems more comfortable, confident. Did you see him Euro step coast to coast? He got a little midi. Now I'll throw some hate on it. And that's what y'all are going to call it, so I'll call it hate too, when it's really not. It's just context. The Pistons rested 4 of their 5 starters. They might have been all 5 were out last night against Charlotte. Why? Because Charlotte is competing with them in the Wemby sweepstakes. They're literally trying to lose games. It's kind of like a summer league preseason vibe in those games. And so, yes, Wiseman looks very comfortable with no stakes. There's nothing on the line, right? That matters. And so, look, y'all know I'm not a Wiseman believer. But I think that, there's this hard line in the sand that people have drawn where it's like, it's either Wiseman stinks or Kerr stinks, and it's Kerr's fault, right? Why can't it be both? Right? That's what my girls always say to me, like, why can't it be both? You know what I mean? Like Kerr does struggle with young talent and Wiseman stinks. That's how I feel. And so I know that a lot of you that are Team Wiseman are super thirsty to take a victory lap once he starts succeeding. It's far too soon for that. Listen, there's plenty. If you've been following my content long enough, I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to be here. You guys can certainly take your victory lap and come back and celebrate next season when and if the Pistons are competing to win and Wiseman is contributing. Now, I'm happy. It was fun to see him. You saw him celebrating with Isaiah Stewart, beef stew on the bench. He's smiling. He's happy. It's cool, dude. It's cool. And he's showing glimpses, right? I think his route is offense. Come in off the bench and just be an offensive big who can get points and with a second unit guard, a pick and roll guard, stuff like that. I'm not saying it's not going to happen, but come on, people. To start taking victory laps with 4 games in games they're trying to lose. I'm not having the Wiseman is good, I told you conversation yet. He looks fine given the context, but let's stop with that. And so back to this Kerr young talent thing. Kerr is married to the system, and the system is Steph Curry. And so as nice a guy as Steph is and how diplomatic he is, if you read between the lines, they didn't want to play with him. They didn't have they don't have the time or patience to watch him develop, and he didn't fit the system that is Steph Curry. So I think that too much of the blame is being put on Kerr. Now, I think what you have to realize is any fan base in the league, Celtics, Knicks, Heat, whoever, right? If you go into a forum and start talking to their fans and game threads and stuff like that, they're going to complain about the rotation. There's always going to be a player that should have played that shouldn't, and why is that guy playing so much? It doesn't matter if you're Greg Popovich, Red Auerbach, or Steve Kerr. Like, that's just going to be part of the fan base and the complaining. And so Patrick Baldwin Jr., why isn't he playing more? It's in hindsight, it's always easy to second guess. And I agree. I think we should see more of him. And I think that Kerr, we know, trusts his vets. Again, he's not absolved from this. There are some issues. For instance, that Wolves game yesterday, when we almost blew it at the end with all those turnovers, Clay gets the ball up past midcourt. What is there, like 30 seconds left? And he pauses. He looks at Kerr, right? Like, let's run clock. And Kerr says, go, go, go. And then he turns it over, gets caught in the air. There are X's and O's issues. And let's not kid ourselves. Guys play favorites. Relationships are built, and you have more trust in one player than another. And I know a lot of people are frustrated with the two-way guys over the younger guys. That's who Kerr is. And I think he deserves a little bit more respect, granted what he has helped contribute to this championships. Look, yeah, you can't say, oh, he built it. Like, look at the talent he had. He didn't mess it up either. We almost had 5 of them if KD doesn't go down. And I think when you're dealing with a true contender with that much talent, it's not about building. It's about not messing it up, if that makes sense. All right, my Kerr rant is over. And again, I want to see Patrick Baldwin Jr. play for various reasons. And I'm going to have a video coming on that soon, probably in the next 48 hours, on what I see with Baldwin Jr. and what I think he perhaps could unlock within this team. So what do we have tonight? Warriors, Blazers. Is Draymond back? I don't know. Dame coming off that 70-piece against the G League Ignite. The Houston Rockets. Warriors, Blazers is always going to have fireworks. And it's, needless to say, an important game because every game these final 20 is in the Western Conference. Be a lot to talk about. I'll be here to cover it all. Hit that like, share, and subscribe. I'm out, y'all.